The dusty Texas wind whispered through the cracked window of the old farmhouse, carrying with it memories that most had long since buried. For years, the townsfolk had spoken of her as if she were a ghost, a woman swallowed by the relentless stretches of prairie, lost to the world and forgotten by the family she once cherished. My mother Martha had vanished without a trace more than a decade ago, and in her absence grief had settled like a heavy fog over our small community. We mourned her as one mourns a broken heart, silently with a lingering ache that refused to fade. I remember the day the news spread that she was gone. The sheriff had found her belongings near the edge of the county line, scattered like the remnants of a life abruptly abandoned. "She's lost," he said quietly to my father, who stood there, fists clenched, refusing to believe what he'd just heard. "We're not sure if she left or if something worse happened. But no body was found. No answers. Just a void where she used to be." For years after, the farmhouse felt colder, emptier. My father tried to hold us together, but the absence of her laughter and warmth was a wound that wouldn't heal. Family gatherings grew smaller, prayers for her safe return became routine, and yet, hope dimmed with each passing year. I often found myself wandering past the fields she loved, wondering if she ever looked back. And then one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the mesquite trees, a stranger appeared on the porch. He was a man in his 50s, wearing a dusty hat and a worn leather jacket, his eyes sharp beneath a tanned brow. I didn't recognize him at first, but the moment he spoke my mother's name, a shiver ran down my spine. "Is this the place?" he asked, voice steady but tinged with something like disbelief. "I think I saw her. Martha Lee. Years ago, on the outskirts of town." I stared at him, heart pounding in a way that felt almost foreign. The stories he told were pieces of a puzzle I never thought I'd see again. A woman living quietly, keeping to herself, surviving far from the prying eyes of a town that had written her off. He had spotted her at a roadside diner in a neighboring county, recognized her from old news reports and photographs that had once circulated after her disappearance. That moment shattered the fragile peace we had wrapped ourselves in, the peace of believing she was lost forever. When I heard the news, a swell of emotions rose up inside me. Relief, fear, hope, doubt. The woman I loved and missed was alive, but for how long? Why had she stayed away? What had she endured during all those years? I found myself standing at the edge of the town square, watching the faces of neighbors as whispers spread like wildfire. Some eyes held cautious joy, others suspicion. Why would she come back now? They wondered aloud. What's she been through all this time? And in my own heart, I wrestled with a storm of conflicted feelings. The Martha I remembered was strong, tender, and fiercely protective of her family. But beneath that strength, I sensed a fragility born of years spent alone, carrying burdens none of us could imagine. The thought of her out there surviving quietly made me both proud and painfully aware of how much she must have suffered. When I finally saw her again, it was in the pale light of dawn. She stood just beyond the edge of the town, framed against the vast Texas sky, her silhouette familiar yet changed. Her hair had silvered, and lines traced stories of hardship on her face. But her eyes, those gentle, weary eyes, held a flicker of the mother I had always known. She didn't speak much at first, just watched as the world she had left behind continued without her. There was a hesitancy in her movements, as if she were unsure whether to step forward or retreat into the shadows that had been her refuge for so long. When I reached out to her, my hands trembling, she flinched, a silent plea to be left alone. "I'm here," I whispered. "I've never stopped looking for you." Her gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment, the weight of years apart hung heavy between us. I wanted to pull her into my arms, to promise that nothing could ever hurt her again. But I also knew that the wounds she carried were deeper than words, and that trust could not be summoned with a single embrace. In the days that followed, she kept to herself, moving through the town like a shadow among the living. Some neighbors offered smiles laced with awkwardness, others averted their gaze. There was a collective breath held, as if we were all waiting to see how this fragile reunion would unfold. She was wary of the past, hesitant to speak of what had driven her away. Every question from my family was met with silence or a gentle shake of her head. It was clear that the years had hardened her in ways we couldn't fully understand. The Martha who had vanished was not the same woman who now stood before us. She was someone shaped by isolation, by the harshness of survival, and perhaps by betrayals too painful to recount. And yet, beneath the surface, there was a faint, flickering hope. The same hope that had sustained her through the darkest nights, and that now began to kindle anew in her heart. She lingered at the edges of our lives, watching, listening, testing the waters of a world that had moved on without her. At night, I would sit by the window, imagining the long, lonely road she must have traveled, the endless Texas plains stretching out like a vast sea, the stars overhead silent witnesses to her solitude. I wondered if she ever thought about us, about the family she left behind, or if the pain of those memories was too great to face. Some nights I caught her looking out at the horizon, eyes distant, as if searching for something just beyond reach. And I realized that perhaps she was trying to find her way back, not just to a place but to a time when hope was still possible. The community's reaction was a complicated tapestry of emotions. Some embraced her return with open arms, eager to mend the wounds of the past and welcome her home. Others whispered doubts, questioning the reasons for her disappearance and the silence that had stretched between us for so long. There were those who feared that reopening old wounds might only deepen the scars, fracturing the fragile peace we had all tried to maintain. In the midst of it all, my mother remained guarded, her heart a fortress built from years of pain and survival. She watched the world cautiously, unsure if she could trust the hands that once held her close, now extended with tentative hope. I could see the internal battle raging within her, the pull between the desire to reconnect and the fear of being hurt again. The life she had built in the shadows was a shield, but it was also a prison that kept her isolated from the love she still craved. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over the dusty streets, I found her sitting quietly on the porch of the old farmhouse, a place that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. She looked up as I approached, eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and strength. "Why did you come back?" I asked softly, not expecting an answer. She hesitated, then whispered, "Because I'm tired of being lost." Those words hung in the air, fragile yet profound. They spoke of a woman who had survived unimaginable trials, but who still yearned for the comfort of belonging. It was the beginning of a journey, one that neither of us could predict, but that both of us knew had to start somewhere. In that moment, I realized that finding her was only the first step. The real challenge lay ahead, helping her find her way home, not just to a place, but to the family and community that had never stopped hoping she would return. Before she disappeared, my mother's life had been a quiet rhythm of hard work and small-town struggles, the kind that shape you without mercy. Growing up in that tight-knit Texas community, Martha had always been the kind of woman who carried her burdens in silence, her resilience forged not in grand gestures, but in the everyday battles she faced alone. I remember the stories she once told me, fragments of a life that felt both familiar and distant now. She had lived in that same weather-beaten farmhouse since she was a child, the land surrounding it stretching endlessly under the vast, unforgiving sky. The town was small. Everyone knew everyone and secrets rarely stayed hidden. Yet, beneath the surface of that close community, there were currents of loneliness and hardship that no one spoke of aloud. For Martha, those currents became a tide that threatened to swallow her whole. Her youth was marked by loss. Her father passed away when she was just a teenager, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone with little more than grit and determination. Martha took on work wherever she could find it, from picking cotton in the sweltering heat to cleaning houses for neighbors, always pushing herself harder to keep the fragile family afloat. There were nights when I imagined she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of responsibility press down like the Texas sun on a summer afternoon. But it wasn't just the hard work that wore her down. There were moments of heartbreak that carved into her spirit. A love lost too soon, a betrayal from someone she trusted. Small wounds that, over time, turned into a deeper pain she couldn't escape. The very community that raised her sometimes turned cold, whispering behind closed doors, questioning her choices, her strength, her worth. I've heard from old friends and neighbors that Martha was a woman who rarely asked for help, who carried her pain tucked away beneath a stoic exterior. She was proud, fiercely independent, and that pride was both her armor and her cage. Maybe that's why, when the pressure became too much, she decided she had to leave, not just the town but the life she knew. She wanted to disappear, to find a place where she could breathe without the weight of judgment or sorrow. The last days before she vanished were filled with a quiet desperation. She had packed a small bag, leaving a note hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was brief, almost cryptic, but it spoke of needing to find herself, to escape the ghosts that haunted her. I never saw that note until years later, tucked away in a dusty box of keepsakes. Reading it felt like reaching through time to touch a part of her I didn't understand. For so long I imagined her wandering the lonely highways, searching for peace in the endless horizon. And in many ways she was lost, not just in the physical sense but emotionally and mentally. The woman who left was a shadow of the vibrant mother I once knew, worn down by years of unseen battles. What changed, I believe, was a moment deep inside her. A reckoning with the loneliness that had defined her existence. She realized that running away hadn't healed the fractures in her heart. Somewhere beneath the layers of pain and fear, a spark of hope remained, fragile but real. It was that hope that started to pull her back, that made her take tentative steps toward reconnecting with the family she had once abandoned. Her first contact after all those years was cautious. A letter, handwritten and trembling, arrived at the farmhouse. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, but the words were careful, measured, as if she was testing the waters before fully diving back into our lives. "Dear family," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness, only understanding. I have been lost, but I am trying to find my way home." That letter was a lifeline, a fragile bridge spanning the chasm of years in silence. It gave us a glimpse into her soul, a glimpse that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. It was the first step in a journey neither she nor we fully understood yet. When she finally returned, it was not with fanfare or grand declarations. It was a slow, tentative process, an unfolding of trust and vulnerability that took time to nurture. She visited the town square, stopped by the church where she had once sung in the choir, and walked the old paths where she had played as a child. Each step was a reclamation of the life she had left behind, but also a confrontation with the ghosts she had carried for so long. She faced the stares and whispered questions of neighbors, the tentative embraces of family members who didn't know whether to hold on or let go. And through it all, she carried the weight of the past, the memories both painful and precious. I saw her sit for hours on the porch of our farmhouse, staring out at the fields where we had once laughed together. Sometimes her eyes would glisten with tears she refused to shed openly, a silent testament to the years lost and the wounds still raw. But in those quiet moments, I also saw a flicker of something new. A determination to heal, to reclaim the pieces of herself that had been scattered by time and pain. Her resilience, once hidden beneath layers of silence, began to shine through in small acts. A smile that came more easily, a willingness to share stories from the past, a tentative reaching out to old friends. She discovered that healing was not linear. It was a winding road filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. Through the stories she shared, I learned of the loneliness that had marked her journey. Nights spent alone in motels, the kindness of strangers who saw her not as a lost soul, but as a person worthy of compassion. The small jobs she took on to survive, the quiet moments of reflection beneath foreign skies. She had been a wanderer, yes, but also a fighter. A woman who refused to be defined by her pain. And yet, alongside her strength, there was a vulnerability that made her more real, more human. She spoke of moments when despair nearly overwhelmed her, when the silence of the night felt like a prison. But she also spoke of moments that kept her going. A song on the radio that reminded her of home, a sunset that painted the sky with hope, a memory of laughter shared with family. Her story was not just one of loss, but of survival and the slow, painful process of reclaiming a life fractured by hardship. It was a testament to the enduring power of hope, even in the darkest of times. As she took tentative steps toward reconnecting with us, I saw in her eyes the struggle between fear and longing. Fear of rejection, of judgment, of facing the past. And yet, beneath that fear, a deep yearning for belonging, for love, for a chance to heal the wounds that had kept her lost for so long. In those early days of her return, I knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. Healing old wounds required more than time. It demanded courage, patience, and the willingness to confront the shadows that had haunted her for years. But I also knew that she was ready to take those steps, fueled by a quiet strength that had carried her through the loneliest nights. Her first tentative contact with the family was just the beginning, a fragile thread weaving her back into the tapestry of our lives. It was a beginning marked by uncertainty, but also by a glimmer of hope that, despite everything, Home was still waiting for her. And sometimes that is all it takes. The courage to reach out, to say, I'm here, even when the past feels like a wall too high to climb. Because in that moment, the lost can begin to find their way back. When my mother finally stepped back into the town she had once called home, the air itself seemed to shift, thick with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and a tension that no one could quite name. Her return was like a stone tossed into a still pond, ripples spreading out and disturbing the surface of long-settled emotions. For some it was a miracle. For others, a reopening of old wounds better left untouched. Our family gathered in the worn living room of the farmhouse, faces etched with years of waiting and unanswered questions. My father's eyes, once hardened by grief, softened in the presence of the woman who had haunted his dreams for so long. Yet, even in that moment, there was an unspoken fear lurking beneath the surface, fear that the past might not be so easily left behind. The community's reaction was a patchwork of emotions. Some neighbors came forward with open arms, offering apologies for the silence and absence that had defined those long years. Others kept their distance, their gazes sharp and wary, as if trying to decipher the reasons behind her disappearance and the silence that followed. It wasn't long before the hidden truths began to surface, unraveling the tightly woven fabric of our shared history. At the heart of it all was the question no one dared to ask aloud. Why had she left? The answer was not simple, and it was buried beneath layers of pain, misunderstanding, and secrets that had festered in the shadows. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the porch, my mother sat with my sister and me, her hands trembling as she shared fragments of the past she had long kept hidden. She spoke of a time when the pressures of the town, the judgments, and the weight of expectations crushed her spirit. She revealed the betrayal she had endured, not just from others but from herself in moments of doubt and despair. The story that unfolded was one of resilience but also of heartbreak. She spoke of a broken friendship that had turned into betrayal, a love that was never returned, and a community that whispered rumors instead of offering support. Those whispers had grown into a chorus that chased her away, making her feel like a stranger in her own home. As she spoke, the room filled with a heavy silence, the kind that holds both pain and understanding. We realized then that her disappearance was not an act of abandonment, but a desperate attempt to protect herself from a world that had turned its back on her. Yet her return stirred more than just old memories. It reopened wounds that many had tried to forget. Family members who had long buried their grief found themselves face to face with the rawness of loss and the complexity of forgiveness. Arguments erupted over the years lost, the silence endured, and the trust broken. Some relatives questioned her motives, wondering if her return was sincere or driven by something else: guilt, loneliness, or perhaps a need for closure. Those doubts hung heavily in the air, casting shadows over the fragile attempts at reconciliation. The town itself became a battleground of emotions. Conversations in the grocery store, the church pews, and the local diner buzzed with speculation. Was she the victim of circumstance, or had she chosen to disappear, leaving others to pick up the pieces? The questions fractured relationships and stirred old resentments. One afternoon at the local market, I overheard a heated exchange between two longtime neighbors. "She left us all to wonder," one said bitterly. "How do we know she's not here to stir up more trouble?" "I think she's been through enough," the other replied softly. "Maybe it's time to forgive and move on." Amidst the turmoil, my mother faced confrontations that tested her resolve. Some townsfolk demanded explanations, others offered awkward apologies, and a few turned their backs altogether. The weight of judgment pressed on her, threatening to push her back into the shadows she had fought so hard to leave behind. But there were also moments of grace. Old friends reached out, extending hands of friendship and understanding. Neighbors shared stories of their own struggles, creating a fragile web of empathy that began to mend the fractures between past and present. In one such moment, a woman who had once been Martha's closest confidant approached her at the church potluck. Tears glistening in her eyes, she took my mother's hands and said, "We missed you. We only wanted you to be safe." Those words, simple yet profound, became a balm for wounds both old and new. They reminded us all that beneath the pain and misunderstandings, there was still a shared humanity waiting to be acknowledged. As the days passed, the chaos of emotions continued to swirl. Family dinners were filled with tentative conversations and awkward silences. Some evenings ended in tears, others in tentative laughter. The process of healing was messy, nonlinear, and deeply personal. Through it all, my mother remained steadfast, determined to face the past she had once fled. She attended community meetings, joined church gatherings, and slowly reclaimed her place in the town's fabric. Each interaction was a step toward rebuilding trust, not just with others but within herself. Yet, the scars of abandonment and silence ran deep. There were nights when she retreated into herself, the weight of memories pressing down like the Texas heat in July. I would find her sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon, lost in thought. "Do you regret coming back?" I asked her once, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me then, her eyes reflecting both strength and sorrow. "No," she said slowly, "but I wish I had been stronger before." Her honesty was a reminder that healing is not about erasing the past, but learning to live with it. It's about embracing the complexity of human relationships, the love and the pain, the forgiveness and the anger, the hope and the doubt. In the midst of the chaos, small victories emerged. My father, once distant and guarded, began to open his heart again. Old friends shared laughter and tears, bridging the gap that time had carved. The town, though divided in its reception, started to witness the resilience of a woman who refused to be defined by her past. But not everyone was ready to forgive. Some family members kept their distance, their silence louder than any words. The wounds ran too deep, the betrayals too fresh. Those fractures reminded us that healing is not a single event, but a lifelong journey. My mother understood this better than anyone. She carried the weight of her choices with humility, never demanding acceptance but quietly hoping for it. Her presence was a testament to the courage it takes to return to a place that once broke you, to face those who doubt you, and to keep moving forward despite the chaos. In the end, the revelation of her story brought both pain and clarity. It forced us to confront the realities we had avoided for too long. The reasons behind her disappearance, the silence that followed, and the fractured relationships that needed mending. And as the dust settled, we began to see that her return was not just a reopening of old wounds but the beginning of a new chapter. One where pain and healing could coexist, where forgiveness could be earned and given, and where family could find a way to grow stronger through the storms they had weathered. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and setbacks. But in the midst of the chaos there was a fragile hope. A hope that even the deepest fractures could be healed, one day at a time. Rumors spread through our town like wildfire, igniting whispers that curled around every porch, every grocery aisle, every church pew. My mother's return, once a fragile beacon of hope, soon became the center of a storm that threatened to engulf her entirely. It was as if the silence of her absence had been replaced not by peace, but by suspicion and judgment. The small Texas town that once mourned her disappearance now questioned her motives, casting shadows over the tentative steps she was trying to take toward reconciliation. "She left us without a word," one neighbor muttered behind closed doors. "Why come back now after all this time?" The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered but echoed in the wary eyes of many. Some whispered that she was seeking pity, others that she wanted to stir old troubles best forgotten. The community's kindness was laced with doubt, and the warmth of welcome was fragile, often flickering out before it could fully ignite. Even within our family, the murmurs found their way in. Cousins who had once embraced her return now held back, uncertain of what to believe. Some relatives openly questioned whether she truly wanted to reconnect, or if her intentions were more complicated. Was she seeking forgiveness, or was she running from something else? The doubts fractured the delicate threads of trust she was trying to weave. My mother, once so guarded, now found herself on the defensive. The weight of judgment pressed down on her, heavier than the Texas heat in midsummer. Every smile met with skepticism, every gesture of kindness shadowed by suspicion. It was as if the town had rewritten her story, painting her as a stranger rather than the woman they once knew. But she did not let the whispers define her. With the quiet strength that had carried her through years of solitude, she sought out allies, friends old and new, who believed in the truth of her journey. One such friend, Clara, a woman who had once worked alongside her in the cotton fields, stood by her unwaveringly. Clara's loyalty became a lifeline, A voice that spoke for my mother when the town's voices turned harsh. Together they began to challenge the rumors, not with anger, but with patience and honesty. They shared stories of the years my mother had spent away. The loneliness, the hardships, the moments of hope that had kept her going. It wasn't easy. Every conversation was met with suspicion, every revelation with disbelief. But slowly the narrative began to shift. The turning point came during the town's annual Harvest Festival, an event that brought everyone together beneath the sprawling Texas sky. The festival was a chance for my mother to face the community openly, to tell her story in her own words. The town hall was packed that evening, the air thick with anticipation and unease. When she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Her voice, steady but soft, carried across the room as she recounted her journey. Not just the years she had been missing, but the pain and resilience that defined them. She spoke of the battles she had fought within herself, the reasons she had left, and the hope that had drawn her back. "I don't ask for your forgiveness," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "I only ask that you hear me, that you understand why I was lost." Her words were raw, vulnerable, yet filled with a quiet power that resonated deeply. As she spoke, the walls of suspicion began to crumble. Faces softened, eyes glistened with tears, and whispers turned into murmurs of empathy. Some stepped forward, sharing their own stories of loss and hardship, creating a chorus of voices that bridged the divides between past and present. That night marked a shift in the town's perception. While not everyone was ready to embrace her fully, the seeds of understanding had been planted. My mother's bravery in sharing her truth opened hearts that had long been closed, and for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of acceptance. Back home, the process of rebuilding trust continued, slow and often fraught with setbacks. Family dinners transformed from tense gatherings into spaces where honest conversations could take place. Old wounds were acknowledged, apologies offered, and the fragile threads of connection carefully mended. Yet the path was not linear. There were days when the weight of judgment threatened to pull her back into isolation, when the ghosts of the past whispered doubts in her ear. But with each challenge, she grew stronger, learning to navigate the complexities of forgiveness and acceptance. I watched as she formed new bonds within the community, joining the church choir, volunteering at the local school, and attending town meetings. Each step was a reclamation of her place in the world she had once left behind. It was not just about being accepted by others, but about accepting herself fully, scars and all. Through it all, Clara remained her steadfast companion, a reminder that loyalty and kindness could withstand even the harshest storms. Together, they faced the lingering skepticism, turning it into opportunities for dialogue and connection. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch of the farmhouse, Clara said, "You're not just surviving anymore, Martha. You're living. And that's what this town needs to see." Her words were a balm, a reminder that the battle for perception was ongoing but not without hope. My mother's journey was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a story of a woman who refused to be defined by whispers and doubts, who chose instead to rise above them with grace and courage. In the quiet moments, I saw the toll the struggle took on her, the exhaustion in her eyes, the moments when the weight seemed too much to bear. But I also saw a fire burning within, a determination to claim her truth and rewrite the narrative that had once sought to erase her. The town too began to change. Conversations shifted from suspicion to curiosity, from judgment to empathy. While not all hearts were won, enough were open to spark a slow but steady transformation. I realized then that perception is a fragile thing, easily swayed by fear and rumor, but also capable of growth and healing when met with honesty and vulnerability. My mother's story became more than just her own. It became a mirror reflecting the complexities of human relationships, the struggle between doubt and trust, between isolation and belonging. And so the journey continued. With every step forward, my mother reclaimed her place, not just in our family or the community, but within herself. It was a battle fought not with anger or resentment, but with the quiet strength of truth and the enduring hope that even the harshest judgments could be softened by understanding. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges yet to come. But for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of possibility, a belief that the past, no matter how painful, did not have to define the future. And in that belief, we found a fragile but precious kind of peace. The morning sun spilled golden light across the porch, warming the weathered wood beneath my mother's hands as she sipped her coffee quietly. The town that once greeted her return with suspicion and whispers had begun to change, slowly but unmistakably. It was as if the collective heart of the community had softened, opening to the woman who had fought so hard to reclaim her place among them. Her journey back was no longer seen as a disruption, but as a testament to resilience. A story that inspired others who had faced their own battles with loss and loneliness. The same streets that once echoed with doubt now hummed with tentative acceptance, the lines between past and present blurring into a new beginning. At family gatherings, laughter returned to fill the spaces where silence and tension had once lived. My father, whose face had been etched with worry for so long, now wore a gentle smile when he spoke with her. The bond they shared, fractured by years of absence, was slowly knitting itself back together with threads of understanding and forgiveness. Neighbors stopped by with fresh-baked pies and warm greetings, their eyes no longer shadowed by skepticism but filled with genuine warmth. The church welcomed her back not just as a member but as a symbol of hope, her voice joining the choir in songs that lifted spirits and mended hearts. But perhaps the most profound change was the peace that settled within my mother herself. The weight of years spent carrying pain and doubt began to lift, replaced by a quiet strength rooted in acceptance. She was no longer the lost woman who had vanished from our lives, but a beacon of hope for what it means to endure and heal. One afternoon, as we walked the familiar paths surrounding the farmhouse, she paused, her gaze sweeping across the fields bathed in late afternoon light. "I never thought I'd find my way back," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years. "But here I am, and I'm ready to stay." Her words were a victory, not just for her, but for all of us who had waited, hoped, and struggled alongside her. The scars she bore were still there, reminders of the battles fought in silence, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they stood as marks of survival, of a journey that had transformed loss into strength. Her story began to ripple beyond our family and town, inspiring others who felt broken or forgotten. She spoke at gatherings, sharing her journey of disappearance and return, of pain and redemption. Her honesty touched hearts, reminding people that healing is possible even when the path seems impossible. In schools and community centers, she became a symbol of resilience, a living example that no one is truly lost if they still carry hope within them. Her presence challenged old stigmas, opening conversations about mental health, loneliness, and the power of forgiveness. But despite the growing admiration and acceptance, she remained humble, never forgetting the long road she had traveled. She continued to nurture the relationships that had been strained, patient and gentle with those still hesitant to embrace her fully. At home, we rebuilt traditions that had been paused for so long, Sunday dinners filled with stories and laughter, quiet evenings spent sharing memories, and the simple joy of being together. Each moment was a thread weaving a new tapestry of family, one strengthened by the trials we had endured. The community, too, found healing through her return. Old grievances softened, replaced by a deeper understanding of the complexities that shape a person's choices. The town's narrative shifted from one of loss to one of hope, from judgment to compassion. In the quiet moments, I watched my mother as she embraced this new chapter, not as a woman fleeing her past, but as one who had faced it head-on and emerged stronger. Her eyes held a calm resolve, a testament to the power of belonging and the unbreakable bonds of family. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, she sat beside me on the porch swing. "Coming home wasn't just about returning to a place," she said, her voice steady. "It was about finding peace with myself and with all the pieces of my story." Her words lingered in the warm evening air, a reminder that no matter how far one might wander, the journey back to belonging is always possible. It's a path paved with courage, forgiveness, and the enduring hope that even the deepest wounds can heal. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I knew that my mother had not only reclaimed her place in our family and community, but that she had become a symbol of resilience, a living proof that even when lost, the journey home can be a new beginning filled with love, acceptance, and the promise of tomorrow.